Today I want to talk about this infamous, famous Ute tax we're about to get in Australia. Okay, so it's quite good to be back in the outdoor studio. The autumnal crispness allows me to get back into my favourite gear, the flano, which apparently qualifies me as some sort of a bogan, which is a derogatory term, and my woolen headwear, beanies, balaclavas, beautiful sunrise about to happen out the back, and of course I've got my cactus, my favourite cactus. Not quite getting in shot, but he sits here with me. Today I want to talk about this infamous, famous Ute tax we're about to get in Australia, and I should put Ute tax in inverted commas because I'm not seeing a lot of understanding about it. And I saw a video the other day, bloke gets quite a lot of views, and he was just pretty much whinging pretty heavily. I just see it differently, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm not. First, I need to qualify a couple of things. I'm certainly not anti-EV. In fact, in my last patch of working, they released the F-150 Lightning. I was pretty keen to get one imported and drive it for my company car just to see how it would work. And strangely enough, just before I came out here this morning, up pops on Twitter, X, that the F-150 Lightning is now available in Australia, 400 kilometre range, call it 225,000. Extended range, call it 255,000. Optioned up, plus on roads, 280 grand. So that's outrageous. And in the bush, 400 k's is not far. You want to load it up, tow something, you're going to lose that range. However, not anti-EVs, love tech, and love tech, how tech moves. I was also going to be involved with a project before I resigned that looked at using some electric vehicles in some shuttle work around the business I work for, perfectly suited to EV work. And the owner, probably a billionaire today, who had already put up lots and lots of solar to try and counter his power bill, which was probably running at 5 million before I left. There was a part of that business that electric shuttles would have suited. Anyway, I left. That wasn't to be. For me anyway. Hopefully they're still going down that road. They could have also been autonomous in some of that work if they set it up correctly. Another thing to remember about me, I am not politically aligned. In fact, I think across the whole political spectrum we've got the worst grouping of politicians I've ever seen in my life, and it comes down to one, ideology, two, just a lack of experience with what's going on the ground. On the Liberal side of politics, you've got the screaming banshee Susan Ley. I'm told she's a lawyer, but she certainly doesn't behave like any lawyers that I know. Over on the Labor side, you've got Chris Bowen, who, gee, I don't know, I reckon in the real world I wouldn't pay him, I wouldn't feed him. So my disdain for politicians runs across the whole network. Some of the others you wouldn't even mention. Ralph Babbitt, for example. But anyway, that's just to clear up that I don't have any political ideologies. I like to look at what people are doing, how they plan on doing it, what the reasons are for doing it. Okay, onto this Ute tax. So this Ute tax thing's been floating around for a while, and it's to do with the introduction of Euro 6, I think, D standards in Australia. And of course, once these things hit social media, there's tremendous amounts of misinformation that gets amplified due to some people's large followings on social media. I won't have that problem. There's been various guesses at how much cars are going to rise in price, and the one I'm going to use is the Land Cruiser. There was a guess somewhere some time back of 25,000 increase in the Land Cruiser price. As I always see it, the costs and benefits are targeted at companies, not individual vehicles. So just to use Toyota as an example, 2023, and I've only used 3 of their sales figures: 26,450 Land Cruisers, 29,267 RAV4s, and 61,111 Hiluxes. Now, if we put those numbers into a bit of a spreadsheet, and the target for Euro 6 to start with, I believe, is 168 grams of carbon per kilometre. If I combine all of those numbers for those 3 models of Toyota, we've got a 207 grams per kilometre equivalent across that combination. if we use the figure of a $25,000 increase for a Land Cruiser, and I appreciate there's been some concessions given to the Patrol and Land Cruiser recently, that's $300 a gram penalty for exceeding that number. So for that grouping of vehicles, penalty implication would be equivalent to $11,794.72 per vehicle. However, whatever that amounts to across 116,000, 117,000 vehicles, the cost can be apportioned however Toyota would want it to be apportioned. Now, just to change that a little bit, if every one of those RAV4s sold were their hybrid RAV4, Toyota's penalty all of a sudden drops to $3,452 per vehicle. Toyota have a lot of scope to maybe even get it back to zero, because I haven't included Corollas and other vehicles that they sell. But across their range, they'll certainly be able to minimise the penalties. Isuzu, on the other hand, look to be fully fucked. What did we sell? 45,341 D-Maxes at 220 grams, gives a penalty of 15,600 per vehicle. 15,600, even more than Toyota with their combination of vehicles. So, and that's why you've been hearing talk about Isuzu exiting the Australian market. Ford, I think, will be similarly hit. Now, I drive a Ford. There's a hybrid coming, but it's going to be north of 100 grand. So the Wildtrak I currently drive, who knows what it could cost? It could go up 15 grand. I haven't seen Ford sales numbers. I haven't dug them up. And look, I've kept this fairly light and fluffy. I prefer to dig into the detail, but I don't think people listen to the detail. I'm more interested in just a bit of a scuff across the top. So that's how I see it, that it's going to be company directed, not per car directed, and then how companies apportion those costs will be how much those cars go up. Now, Toyota may decide to market something more heavily. They may decide to not bring the RAV4 without hybrid into Australia, so they can get those numbers down, because they sure won't want to lose Land Cruiser sales, Hilux sales. I understand there's a hybrid Hilux coming as well. Similarly with the D-Max, they've announced an electric vehicle, but gee, it's not much more than a shopping trolley. Range will be the killer, and range, when you want to put something in it or behind it. On the Pro EV front, there's nothing or not much beats the torque of an electric motor. They are sensational. And you see a lot of people talk about the acceleration of their Tesla and things like that. The torque delivered from an electric motor is far bigger than an ICE vehicle. If they can solve the range problem, and maybe they will, maybe they won't, maybe we need to look at other techs, I don't know. I see a comment the other day, and I thought we all knew these things, that why can't people achieve the numbers that are stated on the sticker on the windscreen, miles per gallon or kilometres per 100 litres? That's because these tests are taken laboratory conditions based around an Australian standard that are supposedly the same for every vehicle, and the government can audit these facilities at any time, and I've got no doubt they do. Having operated a weighbridge, managed a weighbridge for 20 years as part of what I did, they can drop in and give you a barbed wire enema at any time, not necessarily needing to give you any notice. Just ask Volkswagen what happened to them when they were dodging the emission figures of their vehicles. It cost them quite a bit of money. So no, you're not meant to be able to achieve that. It doesn't take into account traffic on the urban cycle. It doesn't take into account roads, hills, load, number of people, wind, your driving style. In any sort of driving, and driving style's pretty interesting. My Ranger, for example, that we do very little work in town, or very little driving in town, but my wife achieves far worse fuel economy than I do. It's not because I drive slower or anything like that, but if I'm in the passenger seat analysing what she does, she approaches roundabouts a lot differently to me, much heavier foot. She takes different routes to me that she says are shorter, but much more stopping, starting and directional changes, and they're the things that soak up your fuel. Also ran into a guy, well, we walk past his house every day. He's just purchased a Chevrolet Silverado 1500, cost him 140 grand. He's very forthcoming with a lot of info. When you talk about diesel versus petrol, he says he's getting 12 to 14 around town. So if we take a mid-range at 13, not that I'd ever want to drive one around town. And look, he uses it as part of his business, or it is his business. So the Chev's using about, outputting about 30 kilograms of CO2 per 100 kilometres. My Ranger at 10 is putting out 27. again, I appreciate that there are other outputs from a diesel engine front, but it's not what we're talking about at the moment. I also recognise that diesel emissions are a carcinogen. We probably need to do something about it. When he hooks this thing up, which is what he does most of the time, he's getting 25 to the 100. Couldn't justify the extra 40 grand to go to the 2500, and he'd probably get that back to about 17, 18. Although he did say he has a heavy foot. And a heavy foot doesn't necessarily mean you're speeding, but at takeoff, foot all the way down to get up to speed quite quickly, he uses a big gut load of fuel. So I actually approached him. He was in the yard. I wanted to measure his tyre footprint because I'm doing something else on pressure on the road, because there's a number of comments around on social media about bigger, heavier cars doing more damage to our roads, and I've still got to measure the footprint on standard tyres of the 2500s. It's just a matter of being in town when the dealership's closed to do such things. So the other part of ICE engines is convenience, and I see people talking about, you know, they need to have a toilet break and these sorts of things, and you can combine that with your charging stop. So if I get in the car here to drive to Sydney, which we might do once a year, I would expect to stop twice on that sort of running 800 to 900 kilometres out of a fuel tank. So we might stop after 3 or 4 hours, toilet stop, coffee, freshen up, and then we'll put in another 2 or 3, refuel, and have lunch just north of Sydney, freshen up the coffee again. So we're probably there for 30, 45 minutes. So 9-10 hours of driving, we might be stopped for an hour tops. I don't think I can do that with an EV, but from here to Sydney I can do that even in the wintertime in daylight hours, which on roads that I don't know is quite important to my driving strategy. So I guess that about wraps up my views on this Ute tax. It won't be as black and white as people see it. Companies like MG, Kia, Hyundai, probably Mitsubishi, Mazda are well positioned, and Toyota are well positioned to take some pretty strong advantage of this coming on. Companies like Isuzu and Ford I see as being in a bit of trouble. The Havels and LDVs, I don't know, they start low, so 10 or 15,000 more on them, it's not going to make a lot of difference, although I have seen some smaller Havels around as well, so maybe they are also well positioned. Audis, Mercedes, rich people don't care if you've got a lot of money. You don't care if you're paying 400,000 for your Mercedes or 450,000 for your Mercedes. That's just how life is when you're rich. And there's a lot of money still sloshing around in the economy. Don't really care what anyone says. I do appreciate and feel for the people that are struggling, but generally there's still a lot of money floating around in the economy. I guess that's about it. Not sure what channel to put this on. I'll probably put it on both channels, but look out for my tyre footprint, road pressure extravaganza. It'll be as boring as batshit, but there's a couple of things I didn't know before I started. It's quite interesting, the results that I've got so far.